Joining me now for this pregame edition of the Knicks Film School Podcast, the Knicks take on the Milwaukee Bucks, who come in at 25-14. Ironically, this is a potential playoff preview because this is the 3 seed, currently the Milwaukee Bucks, against the number 6 seed New York Knicks. And joining me to preview this matchup on Monday night is Ti Windisch. You can hear him on the Gyro Sports Podcast Network, on the Gyro Step podcast. Knicks fans or people from New York, if you see the name of the podcast and it's GYRO, that's not the sandwich that you like to get on the corner of most places in the city. It's pronounced Euro in different parts of the country. Love how this podcast and expand our horizons as to how the other portions of the country say specific words. Ti, thank you for joining me here on Knicks Film School Podcast. How you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk Bucks Knicks. I'm not a full believer in that notion that the NBA is so much better when the Knicks are good. Like some people, I think, really blow that up. Mm-hmm. But I think it's a little better. I think it's nice. I think it's fun when New York is excited. And, 2 years ago when Randall had the all NBA season and all that, I think it's good. I think some people get a little too, it's 1 of 30. There's a lot of teams, but I do think it's good. Now it's like the Knicks uniforms. So.
Yes, there's some classic Knicks uniforms that I like. And while I can't speak for the rest of the country that elicit that theory that the NBA is better when the Knicks are good, I can tell you my life personally is better when the Knicks are good.
It's definitely better in New York. That's for sure.
Yes, much better here. I'll tell you that much. So it's funny, when I originally reached out to you to do this pregame show, my first question was going to be about the Toronto collapse, but then come back with the win in overtime, because the Knicks just suffered something similar against Dallas and unfortunately didn't come away with the win. And lo and behold, the basketball gods decided the Knicks would almost do the exact same thing on Friday night, up 16 with 3.5 to play, and it became a 2-point lead late. If you can still, I guess we'll compare experiences here. Take me through the last 45 to 90 seconds of the Raptors game, because I'll tell you how I felt watching my experience, and you tell me yours.
The funny part about it was, so I cover the Bucks G League team that Wisconsin Herd. So I was leaving the Herd Stadium in Oshkosh after finishing my interviews, and I was waiting for Lindell Wigginton, who's a great guy, always takes forever after the game. And he had a big game. I had to talk to him. Took forever. So I talked to Lindell about press coverage or whatever. Checked my phone on the way to my car. Bucks are up. God, what was 21 with 7 minutes to play or something like that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but they were up, I think, 20 plus in the fourth quarter. Put my phone away. I go, oh, good Bucks win. Need to notch more of those. I get home. I pull up the NBA app and I see 97-97 end of regulation. And I was like, are you serious? So I didn't get to watch it all live. I had to revisit it and rewatch some of it. I got to watch overtime, which was I was gritting my teeth the whole time. I think Grayson Allen, who's been a pariah for Bucks fans for a lot of this season, came through and hit a couple of big shots. But, you go back and look, and it's so funny. The Bucks are at this point now where they've lost some games pretty poorly, and now the fans are getting upset about Mike Budenholzer again. So Bud got a lot of hate because he took out the starters. I think they were up 17-ish or something with 3 minutes left, and he puts in Thanasis and the others. Thanasis is certainly the human victory cigar, and the Raptors just never stop trying, keep on going, and they make it a game. And I think it's just I think it's 30% just pure effort, 70% just spite. I feel like the Raptors win out of spite this season, or try out of spite this season. Seems like there's some issues there maybe with touches. Fred VanVleet on JJ Redick got a little into that. I know there's been stuff about OG Anunoby before. Nick Nurse is just I'm just going to play everyone 45 minutes every night. I think they have 3 of the top 4 minutes played or something.
That they do.
So I think the other teams are just ready to be done playing the Raptors. It seems annoying, all the switching and defense and everything. And the Raptors are just no, we're not done. We have to experience this every game. We're going to make everyone experience more of it with us too.
Yeah, it's not necessarily comparable because obviously Tom Thibodeau, I think he has almost a philosophy that I will be the last to take my starters out. If you take your starters out, then I know it's safe, but I will not be the first to take my starters out. But for the Bucks, I'll call it collapse, but we'll call it a Raptors comeback against the Bucks.
It was both for sure.
Well,
there was also
so much stuff had to happen, you know.
And if I don't mention specifically, Bucks fans will get mad. I mean, Siakam clearly follows Bobby Portis when he's by the baseline, and they ended up calling it out on Bobby Raptors ball, and Bud couldn't challenge it. And that was another. How does Bud not challenge that? He's like, I couldn't challenge it. You can't challenge a no call. But that also had. There was a couple things that were like, okay, it really should have been over even with the collapse in regulation. But I mean, the Raptors, you got to credit, they played super hard as they usually do.
Well, so I'll also make sure Knicks fans hear me when I say this, that Emmanuel Quickley was blatantly fouled on a 3-pointer and it was not called during our collapse against the Raptors. And then you add in, like, there was some possessions. Like, Knicks fans, I think I share in this frustration. Their last 4 minutes of their crunch time offense is just not great. It's a lot of ISO. The ball just kind of stops, and it's Randall do something or Jalen Brunson do something. There are some more motions, like if defenses collapse, they do have some like penetrate and kick to the wing actions in there that I do like, but sometimes they don't kick, which is annoying. RJ Barrett, when he was healthy, was an option that did that as well. I will say this. I share now in your relief that you can have a collapse like that, but still walk away with the win, you know, that you're able to enjoy it to that sense. What are the vibes like in Milwaukee? I think you kind of hinted at them. The Bucks started 9-0. They're 16-14 since. You let me know. How are Milwaukee fans feeling about this season?
Not great. So it's a combination of a couple things. I mean, I think one, you go 500-ish over 30 games, and that's obviously, not going to be ideal. And that's not something, that's not something the Bucks have done over this. I want to say over this long of a stretch of games. They started pretty poorly last season too, but it was like Brooke isn't playing at all. Drew Holiday was out for a while, yada yada. And I think they were under 500 early, but then they rebounded. So maybe it's not the worst stretch of 30 games, but it's one of the worst we've seen under Mike Budenholzer since he's been the Bucks coach. I mean, they won 60 games or were on pace to every year until the championship season and then last season as well, with just the injuries and short rest and everything. So that's part of it. And then I think the Chris Middleton injury saga, which is even worse because last year we had the Brooke Lopez injury saga, and it's like, fans always default to what they know. So Brooke, if you recall, was just like mysteriously out after the first night, and it was just like back soreness for a while. And then we actually thought he was going to come back. There was like this weird interview with Shams Charania, and it was like, it's like the audio cut out when he was saying when he was going to come back, and we all thought the Bucks were like jamming a signal or something. And then we learned he had back surgery and he doesn't come back until March. So everyone is concerned now that Chris is going to need some sort of surgery and be out for longer. Budenholzer plainly said no to that. And I think they really want his conditioning to be right, given the injury. He lost his dad this past year. He's been sick. So there's just been a lot going on with Chris. I think they don't want to rush him back and make sure he's ready. And he came back a little bit and then had to go out again, and more knee soreness and illness. So all of that, and that coupled with the fact that Chris is the team's most important ball handler. They've missed Drew for a lot of this stretch. George Hill has been wildly important, which is a bad thing, and he's missed time. Joe Ingles isn't ready to play every game, and he's been up and down since making his return, and they just don't have enough ball handlers. Javon Carter, who was really good earlier this season, has been bad since like the start of December, basically. So the lack of ball handlers has made offense really hard. They've lost Giannis minutes more than ever before, and there's been a few games where they go down early and they just basically give up. The Hornets scored 51 points in the first quarter against the Bucks. So that's more, I think, just effort, but it's coupled like effort, lack of ball handlers, loss of Chris, everything else. And they're still right now, I think, third in the East, and not that far from first. So it's not like it's a total disaster, but the vibes are bad because Bucks fans aren't used to seeing we're just getting rolled again. Like Memphis smoked them. The Hornets smoked them. They blew a late game against the Bulls. The Nets smoked them. And this is all in like the last month and change. So it's been a stretch of, I think the Bucks, there's a couple things going on, and the outcome has just been like pretty uninspiring basketball for a lot of this stretch.
I share with the rest of the country that was like did a double take on Friday when we saw the box score, or at least the score update throughout the telecast of the Hornets and the Bucks game. Yeah. And I was curious to talk to you about like what's going on. Do you get this sense from watching the team and covering the team that, and look, it's been forever since the Knicks have had a period of sustained success where like the regular season doesn't matter. And it's like our season starts in April. Do you get the sense that there's a hint of that with this team, that yes, the regular season does matter and we want to make sure we're a top 3 seed, but as long as we're top 3 and it doesn't dip below that, we can turn it on come playoff time, and that's when our season starts. Is there this doesn't matter until April amongst the team?
I think there's a little bit of it. I don't think that's the whole reason. I think they still want to win. I mean, I took their over at the start of the year just because I was like, they'll punt some games where it's like, okay, the two-way guys are starting or whatever. And I think we'll probably see some of that, this month. They have a couple of really tough stretches. They have back-to-back Atlanta, Miami, then a day off in Miami, then another Miami game right after the Knicks game. That's when that starts. So it's like, really, please win the Knicks and Hawks games, because 2 straight Miami games is torture. Even with the Heat not being as good this season.
This season, it might not be too terrible.
The Miami flu, though. The Miami flu still applies.
Going to Miami might be the bigger thing you're facing.
And they typically defend the Bucks well. Although, again, this season has been tougher for them in general. But I think there's some of that. But, I mean, Giannis always wants to win. I think it's really like it's a little bit of that, we're a playoff team. But I also think they don't go like the LeBron Cavs with it. Like they're not like, oh, we really don't care at all. I think they still want to play well and win. I think also the age of the roster is showing in a way that I didn't expect it to so early. I mean, Wes Matthews has been really hard to watch and has just not had the same impact on defense that we're used to. And offensively, you don't expect too much from him. Like George Hill has been good, but he's like, 35-year-old George Hill. Ingles has had some good stuff offensively, but he certainly looks like, a guy in his mid-30s returning from an ACL on defense. There's been some really tough moments where like Denny Avdia is like blowing by him and dunking. It's like, okay, I mean, Brad Beal gets by you, sure. Denny Avdia should probably have a slightly harder time, Joe. So I think really it's multiple things that kind of stack up. Like losing Chris for so long is the main one. And then there's a lot of other things cascading. I think it is pretty clear, though, that like they usually do, that they're going to need to make a move this trade deadline, get a little younger, I think, a little more athletic. Marjon Beauchamp playing more would help, but I think even more they could use some more just like athletes who are going to keep them in games when the other teams start running, because the Bucks, like Giannis can't run on both ends every game of an 82-game season. It's just too much. And they just don't have enough guys who are on both ends are willing to go do that. Like Drew is one. They just haven't had him enough recently.
Well, let's talk about the trade deadline a little bit.
I've got some questions for you later.
I will
really just one.
Well, so go ahead and ask you. What's your question?
What's the deal with this Quickly stuff? Because Knicks fans keep getting mad at me because I'm putting him on my list. I'm saying I'd love the Bucks to trade for Emmanuel Quickly. It'd be great to have this young guard who can do stuff, like trust him a lot more offensively than Javon Carter. All this, They're like, why would you? This is our son. It's like, well, I keep seeing him in the rumors. They keep saying they're willing to trade him. If he's if he's on the rumors, I'm gonna put him on my list. He's a good player, and you're
100% justified in doing so, because Emmanuel Quickly is, like you said, a very dependable hybrid sixth man fifth starter. Like he probably is like too qualified to be a bench player, but he's not someone that you necessarily need to start games. He's like, I've looked at him as someone that should be playing 25 to 30 minutes, but like regardless of whether it's the sixth man or your backup, your starting two guard, which he's been lately, while RJ's out. The Emmanuel Quickly love is real here in New York, though, and you kind of have to go back to last season with the Emmanuel Quickly love, when the Knicks season was going nowhere and Tibbs just refused to see what he looks like as a starting point guard. Like Alec Burks was starting games for most of last year, and if it wasn't Burks, it was Kemba, and we like went through the Kemba Walker experience, and like Kemba lost his job, then COVID happened and he got his job back. They went 3-17, told Kemba to go home, and then for every game after the All-Star break, Quickly still did not get it was the Alec Burks show, and quickly didn't get the chance to be featured for a while just to see what this was. So the attachment to not just quickly, but a lot of the younger players on this team.
Yeah, Obi has been the same, right? They just don't play him, even though he looks good.
So the Obi thing last year was at least justified. Randall's been otherworldly this season, so at least you can be like, well, they're not playing him because they have a potential all-star playing ahead of him. Plus, Obi's been out the last 5 weeks. He just got cleared to start ramping up to play 5-on-5, so you might actually see the debut of Obi Toppin in this game that the Knicks play on Monday. But at least you understood when it was the guy you just gave a 4-year extension to and Randall playing over Obi.
Sure.
The quickly thing, there was never an excuse, which is why I think Knicks fans, and look, the other reason is that Emmanuel Quickly's really freaking good. And I completely understand with him being extension eligible this summer, the Knicks might not want to pay him.
You're right.
And a contributor to, he writes for The Athletic, but is on our pod all the time. Fred Katz, who covers the Knicks for The Athletic, had a story in December that reported the Knicks were shopping Emmanuel Quickly. I do think there was a recent report that's kind of gone away. And
I mean, I'd be so well.
That's the part. They actually have some aspirations this season now. If it's not, I don't think they have championship aspirations, but it might actually be reasonable to be like the next step is going to the second round. It may also be the next step is forcing a team to 6 games, but they want to keep Emmanuel Quickly around and reassess this offseason. I say all of that to say we have this thing called cap or no cap, where we talked about why it would actually be an understandable reason to look around and see what the value is for Emmanuel Quickly, but not necessarily shop him with the intention of trading him. It's good to know that on a contender like the Bucks, though, that is a player that is being targeted.
Well, I mean, I'm thirsting over Jordan Clarkson right now, and Quickly just seems like probably not as good right now, but also a lot younger, and you can keep him around and all that stuff. Who else are you putting on your target list? Ooh, I mean, I would still take Crowder. I'm just not that excited about it. I feel but it's it always helps to have another big defensive wing. We'll take that. I mean, the dream for me, I don't know if I should say dream, but I love Bojan. I mean, and I don't know if they'll trade him. I mean, we saw this with Jeremy Grant. They'll wait and do it later. They're not going to be pressed to do it. But that's a guy the Bucks have 1 first they can trade 2029. And I'm actually doing a Substack piece that'll go up Monday today when people are hearing this, maybe, that it's if they wait to trade it until the 24 draft, they could trade 29, 31, and whoever they pick in 24. So that would be a logical point for them to kind of flip the core, because Chris and Drew are older than Giannis. They'd like to, if Giannis is down to stay around, they'd like to get some younger star talent around him. So then 3 first versus 1 first, which is all they'll have until then, is a lot better. So I think they might want to keep that. But I mean, if you can add Bojan right now and that's one of your starters, if you're the Bucks, I think I wouldn't say no. If your starting 5 is Drew, Bojan, Chris, Giannis, Brooke, you still have Pat Connaughton. Hopefully Grayson Allen's gone, but you still have Pat Connaughton, Bobby Portis, those guys. That's okay. I'll swing it for that, and let's go have a significantly better chance of winning it all this year. So that's the interesting thing the Bucks are in. But yeah, I mean, quickly I'd be thrilled. Clarkson, I'd be really happy. Bojan, I'd be okay, hell yeah, let's cook.
Okay. I need to ask you about Grayson Allen, because I know
you want him?
No, but it's probably for other reasons than you have, because you actually had the Grayson Allen experience. You called him an enigma earlier, I think it was.
No.
What was it?
Pariah. I called him a pariah. It's worse.
That's what
I was going to say. Enigma is mysterious. There's no mystery here.
So what is the feeling about Grayson Allen? Because he did hit a gigantic shot against the Knicks a couple weeks ago. In fact, it was the Wednesday before the Dallas game, the first Dallas game, that everybody thought Tibbs was going to get fired the next day. And it actually started an 8-game winning streak for the Knicks, turned their season around. But it does seem like he takes he does make big shots whenever I'm at certain points that I've been watching the Bucks. What makes him a pariah amongst Bucks fans?
I hope the Knicks remember that shot as much as you do, because if that helps make some trade happen, that's good with me. The problem with Grayson is I think he's always gonna, at the end of a regular season, have a really good 3-point percentage. He played well against Toronto as well. He had 16. But if you look at like some of the worst points of their season, so starting December 15th, he scored in the single digits 5 out of 6 games and then 6 out of 8 games. It's just like, for what they need, for what his role is on the team, like he is, or at least has been for most of his time on the Bucks, the 5th starter, and is like the other offensive wing behind Chris. And he's clearly not as good as Chris Middleton, but like his role is such, so they really, when you have your second scoring wing, you need them to pick up the slack when guys are out. And at points last season and against the Bulls in the playoffs, Grayson was like, oh yeah, like I can score 20 a game for a while because I get all these shots and he can hit threes. He's a good 3-point shooter. His drives are an adventure. Sometimes they're terrific. Sometimes they're disastrous. He's had some of the worst live ball turnovers I've ever seen, but I think he's cut them down a bit. But he'll just disappear for a while. And that's the problem, is like, it's just really, it's a liability to start someone like that when you're a championship contending team or aspire to be such. Because like the Bulls series where he just couldn't do anything for multiple games, and like the Celtics series, and they have great wing defense and it's hard for everyone, but he couldn't do anything. And it's like, you need to be able to do something. So I think someone who's just a little more dynamic, maybe with the ball, someone who they can just rely on more, even if the skill set isn't that different. It's like one of those intangible things, but I think it's just become clear that I guess we'll say like the third offensive guy in the perimeter or so, like Chris Drew, if you want to call Giannis, like the guy behind that offensively, the next best guy needs to be better and more reliable than Grayson Allen, is what it feels like this season and the Celtics series has taught the Bucks. So that's why like I was like Jay Crowder, sure, whatever, like he's a useful offensive player. I'd really like someone though who it's like, yeah, we trust this guy to do more if we need a couple buckets at some point in a tight game.
Which, I mean, this is the problems of a team that's contending for a title, is that, the 8th and 9th, and I guess in Grayson's case, the 7th or 6th man on your team, like that, who that person is matters. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what they do to upgrade that spot. How do Bucks fans feel about Coach Bud these days? I know the last time we had you on, it was the championship glow. He's got a free pass for a year. That was last season. And, I from the outside looking in, look at how the Bucks season ended and not excuse losing to the Celtics, but like you took that team that made the finals to 7. You had Jason Tatum have a legendary performance in Game 6.
It's kind of his proving point, I think, that he's a legit superstar.
Exactly. But it, unfortunately, I'm sure this is bringing up old wounds, but it happened at the expense of the Bucks in your arena. Where do things stand with Coach Bud these days, now that he doesn't have the recent pass of we just won a title?
Yeah, it's funny. The Bucks fans are out again. A lot of them. I don't say all. Oh yeah. I mean, there's fire Bud tweets. It's pretty ridiculous and stupid, I think. Like his strengths as a coach are long-term things that are just not, I think, really perceptible to fans a lot of the time. So like he's bringing MarJon Beauchamp along slowly, and MarJon he should play more. Like it's not like I disagree. I'm not blindly in Bud's corner on every issue. But it's like, yeah, he's bringing along a rookie player who's super raw slowly. And it's like that's understandable. But it's like, oh my God, if Grayson Allen starts above MarJon Beauchamp, this guy should be left in Toronto. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like, come on, like who cares? And it's like, oh, the Bucks aren't trying hard enough because of Bud. And and there's all these things. It's like they turn a ball over too much because of Bud. It's like, Bud's not the one throwing lazy passes. Do you think Bud is going to Giannis and saying like, yeah, just don't look, just throw the ball somewhere? Giannis had some bad turnovers or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's like everything becomes his fault. It's like there are a lot of things that are his fault, and it's been a tough season. It's also, though, for the same reasons that the Boston series was tough. Like, they haven't had Chris for most of it. They've lost Drew for a lot of it. They have a roster that, coming into the season, I thought was going to be their best roster we've seen. It just hasn't played out as such. And again, a guy like Wes Matthews, who started against the Celtics and was a very useful player, not being able to match that at all so far. it's a big deal. It's a kind of huge deal for the Bucks. So, they've got to reshape the roster. I don't think Bud has been perfect, but it's also just trying when you don't have enough ball handlers and your shooting comes and goes. And for most of December, it went. They just could not hit any threes. Funny enough, against Charlotte, they were knocked down. It just didn't matter because they didn't play any defense or rebound the ball at all. But they were fine. It was nice to at least see some threes go down, which we just didn't see for like months and months and months. So I think like the team just has not played well. There's a lot of understandable things. And then there's a couple Bud decisions, like not playing Marjan, some of the rotations, which have been bad. But also it's like you look at the guys they've had available. What's the great option? You're not going to play Giannis 45 minutes against the Charlotte Hornets when you're down 30 points or against the Raptors or whatever else. Like that's just some things you're not going to do when you're the Bucks. So I don't think he's had a great year coaching, but of course the fan reaction is like apoplectic.
So I should, before I respond to what you said about Bud with some relatable reactions with the Knicks fan base and their head coach, we did just get a report from the Knicks, two beat reporters on the Knicks, both Stephen Bondi and Fred Katz. Obi Toppin went through all of practice today and sounds like he will be available to play against the Bucks. So you will get to see one.
That'll be fun.
Obadiah Toppin against the Bucks on Monday night. It's so very relatable. There are fired Tibbs tweets and post-game comments. And like, I'm flat out not as, I don't want to call him blindly defensive about Tibbs, but passionately defensive about Tibbs as my colleague and good friend, Mr. Macri is, but I lean more positive than negative with Tibbs. There was a point this season where I thought there was an effort issue. They had made multiple rotation changes and we were still like struggling to get max effort and good contests from this team, which like that shows signs of a team that has quit on its coach. After that, it's literally after that point, they're 13-5 in the last 18 with one of the best net ratings in the sport. They're doing things under Tibbs. Like you mentioned that JJ Redick, Fred VanVleet podcast, and he mentioned like something positive about Tibbs' offense and how much they're disguising their Spain pick and rolls this season. And that's like been their main offense. As you mentioned, is there quibbles with like how often he plays guys? And like you bring up Emmanuel quickly. If RJ Barrett doesn't get his finger chopped off by Luka Doncic, quickly's probably playing 17 to 20 minutes a game still. And I don't think that's acceptable. And when you're playing in the margins like that, it's concerning that he won't play one of his six best players more than 17 minutes. I say all of that because the Knicks don't have the championship expectations where you can be a little more like, we'll judge him on his postseason track record. And there are two portions of the fan base that are like, listen, we're normal. The floor right now is like the play-in. We'll take it. And then there are other ones that are like, we should be leaning fully into playing all of these kids as much as possible. And with that won't happen with this head coach. And I can relate to some unreasonable, but also then some understandable frustrations with a head coach that I don't think is doing that terrible of a job this season.
Yeah, I think the Bucks offense has been kind of a mess too. And I think that's somewhat on Bud for sure. It's also on the roster hasn't been that good. The guys who have played just haven't played that well a lot. And it's like, okay, I mean, there's only so much you can scheme. I mean, that's why at the end of the day, most NBA coaches, even the good ones, are relatively unimportant, especially compared to other sports. It's really hard. Like what Pop did, it's so hard. And also, hasn't really won that much without Tim Duncan. He had a couple good years after, but it's like, it's not to take anything away from Greg Popovich, but there's just like, there's much more importance on the players and not much less, but there's certainly less on the coach in basketball because there's so few players and the talent level is such a big deal. It's really hard to consistently punch above your weight class because you just can't make up for not having LeBron if the other team has LeBron or Giannis or prime Tim Duncan, whoever it is. So it's just funny that there's so much made of all this. And then I talk to coaches, like people, not NBA head coaches, but like people who coach around at different levels, wherever. And it's like, the fans have no idea of a lot of what really matters and what goes on. It's just like there's some things that are obvious and fair, and some that are just like you're missing the forest for the trees.
Well, I don't know if you saw this from your most recent, well, not most recent game, but the Raptors game. I tapped into some of Raptors Twitter lately.
Oh, they hate Nurse now.
They hate Nick
it's
Nurse.
Hilarious.
Like, wait.
Yeah, it's like that's the thing. It's also like offensive lines. I think in the NFL, where almost every team is like, yeah, our coach stinks. It's like, okay, are they all bad? Is there two good coaches?
So yeah, believe me, relatable.
Well, it's like Steve Kerr, the Warriors fans on Steve Kerr over the years. There's been so much the dynasty.
Well, so Warriors fans before last season were like, didn't win anything without KD. The last thing we had before that unbeatable team is him blowing a 3-1 lead against Cleveland. And then last year happened. It's like, oh, he actually is like a really good head coach.
And I think that the long-term stuff of just like learning things over a full season, keeping a team together, which I think is one of the Bud things that goes underappreciated. I mean, their collapse in 18 or in the 19 playoffs against the Raptors and then against the Heat in the bubble. And then Giannis was able to walk after that season. And it's like most of it is Giannis, but there's also some Bud, like keeping a group together, like those kind of things that don't really get talked about much.
Well, you segued perfectly into my last question, because I would be remiss if I didn't ask a Bucks podcaster about Giannis. And we do a Patreon pod where we talk about the NBA at large, and we've been tracking. One of the fun things we do is we track the NBA and the MVP race.
Oh yeah.
And John and I both picked Giannis to win MVP at the beginning of the year. I have a take that if he wins MVP, it doesn't have to win Depoy, but if he wins Depoy, it helps my take a lot. Wins MVP, wins Depoy and the title this year. I have him in my top 15 ever. I don't think it's that. For sure. I don't think it's even that. Like, he's ahead of Hakeem. That's for me at least.
Yeah.
And as we've tracked it, it seems like he's one of the forgotten men that. Like KD's having an unreal year. Luka obviously doing what he's doing. Tatum on one of the better teams in the NBA, and then obviously Jokic.
I was going to say the league is incredible because 4 guys have been mentioned and not Jokic, who I think is I think people are going to be upset. Some Bucks fans are. I think he should be number 1 right now. He's so good, dude. Like, geez.
Yeah. Well, so now I go to the race, and yet Giannis seems to.
Yeah,
be taken for granted a little bit, and people are sleeping on Giannis being a consistent, source of one of the better defenders in the sport, as well as close to 30 points, close to 12 rebounds, and a high effective field goal percentage. He hasn't been like to his standard as good as years past, but again, it's his standard that he's set. What's it like watching? From obviously an intimate level, like your guy be talked about around the league so consistently, and then what are your projections for his all-time standings when this season comes to an end? Are you still confident that like this season will add to his legacy?
Yeah, I think they all will at this point. I mean, if he doesn't win a given year, I think now that he's done it and in such definitive fashion that like anyone who thought he didn't have a bag or couldn't win or whatever, like you're just wrong. It's not a debate anymore. I don't feel the need to argue with people like I did before that. He dropped 50 points in game 6 of the finals and shot 17 for 19 from free throw. He was the whole team in that game. Like all credit to Chris and Drew and everyone who made that. PJ, everyone, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Brooke Lopez. I think that's pretty much everyone who played a lot of minutes. It was him. It was Giannis. He did it. I think he's the best in the world still. I don't think he should win MVP based on what's happened so far this season. Like, I think if he's not in someone's top 3 or maybe even top 5, I'm not upset about it. Like, I don't think they played that well. And that obviously has a lot to do with anyone's case. Like, I saw KD was number 1 in the Eastern All-Star returns. And I was like, yeah, that's understandable. I mean, he plays in New York. They've been so good. He's been the engine. Like, he's been unstoppable. So, sure. I mean, they beat mostly bad teams and whatever, but All-Star is always a reflection of like half the year anyway. So I'm not going to get that upset. He has to start. I think he will.
He will.
There's no question. But yeah, and the rest of the All-Star stuff for the Bucks is complicated. But, Giannis, I don't think is the best Depoy candidate on his team this year, which is. Would you
go to Lopez?
Yeah,
Lopez. Okay.
Who I think I was listening to the last not not game specific Knicks Film School pod and talking about Randall's All-Star. And I was like, oh man, like, that's a good case. And I think Brooke might lose out to him, which is unfortunate. Brooke is the second All-Star I'd like for the Bucks this year. It'd be cool if Drew got one too. Chris got what should have been Drew's last year. So if they keep switching around, that's cool. I think he would set a record for the longest stretch between All-Stars. I think Brooke would actually too, because it's been like 10 years for both of them since they made the game. And they're such different players now. But Brooke has been the rock, the anchor defensively. Giannis, I think, still is the best defensive player on the team when he wants to be, but he wants to be less because he does so much offensively. And Brooke is the opposite. Like, Bucks fans would be like, why doesn't Brooke post up more? Because he is guarding the rim in all of his minutes, and he's one of the best, if not the best in the league, now that Gobert's falling off a bit at doing so. Take whatever points he gives you. 14.5 per game from him has been very much needed and great. He is a defensive guy. Let him focus on that. But Giannis, just real quick, I know I talked about everyone but Giannis, and I denigrated Giannis. I got to talk about Giannis. I denigrated him. I think he's the best player in the world. I think he's had to make up for so much this season. And there's been times where I've been like, Giannis should really pass more. Giannis needs to work on the offense more. And then you get to the end of the game and like no one's hitting any shots. And it's like, okay, I get it. Like, I understand why you're doing this. Like, you'd have to do this. He wants to win every game that he plays. And he's just like relentless and unstoppable and dominating. Like, I think his skill is still probably a little underrated and what goes into that and the angles he can score at from the rim and how he gets past guys, how he uses his legs to feel opposing players and get around them, which is something that Michael Jordan taught Kobe. And I know Kobe worked with Giannis. Who knows if that was a direct line thing or not, but he's so good, but he's also just like, he wants to dominate every possession. And it's just like so fun to watch a guy who's just like going out there every night. And it's just like, I'm just going to beat the other team. I think that he had a career high recently against the Wizards. I think it was at the second Wizards game. And it was just like, yeah, he just decided they weren't going to lose again. And he just made that decision and then did it. And it's like, it's so fun to watch him. And, you know, he's pimped the Milwaukee on his jersey when he did it. And we did an emergency pod and it's such a cool moment. But I think, yeah, like the fact that he's so, I don't know about wholesome because he makes sex jokes all the time, but he's like such a great guy off the court. And also he's like so great of a player and so dominating and fun to watch. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I try to keep that in mind, even when they're 16-14 over 30 games and his efficiency is down. They lose his minutes more than we've ever seen before. It's not because Giannis isn't great. It's because he's having to do so much. So yeah, it's been a blast.
Yeah,
it used to be a blast.
I saw one of the clips you posted about, like, and I've read a lot about the Kareem fallout in Milwaukee and how, like, appreciate this as it's happening. Like, we can talk about the future and this season and like where this season's going, but like appreciate what we're watching as it's happening, because we have not, as a fan base, as Bucks fans, seen a player like this since Kareem, and that obviously ended a certain way. And you know, it's hard not to be jealous watching, you know, from afar. But I'm as an NBA fan, I'm an admirer, obviously, of what Giannis does, and curious to see where his career takes him. Yeah. Before we get out of here, do you have any questions about the Knicks before we go?
I'm excited for the game. I think it's been some fun battles. I know the Bucks are 2-0 against them this year, and I think, you know, right now, I think the only guys for sure we know will be on the injury report after that OB update are RJ. It seems like is still going to be out. Chris, I think, is also still going to be out. So I was looking at the two games they played earlier today, and I saw Drew had a big plus minus in both, which makes sense given the Jalen Brunson factor for the Knicks. And I know Giannis against RJ, I think, is going to be obviously not RJ against
Randall.
Randall is a big matchup too that should go the Bucks' way. But I think, you know, it's funny, like the Brunson discourse between when it was first happening and now. And there's so much like, this is really their plan. And maybe that's fair to some extent. Like, he's not an all NBA player, but I do think still there are too many NBA fans who are just unaware of how important the point guard position is. And my bet, this is a good example because I think he organizes so much for them and makes RJ and when he's playing and Randall's lives easier and better. But I always remember the process Sixers, the worst year. It looked like they were going to go 6-76 for a while, which I thought would have been cool. And then they got Oh my God, Ish Smith. They got Ish Smith of all players. Yeah. And they were a decent team. They were bad, but they were like a respectable bad team after that. It's just like, oh yeah, you need someone to organize things. And going from old Derrick Rose, who no longer plays, to Jalen Brunson is a big deal. And I just think like, it's cool. I think it's good for teams to just get better. I think we're good. That this year in the NBA, there's not so many teams who are just like, we just want to be really bad and get Wembanyama, which was a fear of mine before the season. I'm glad that teams like the Knicks are like, no, we have good players. Let's be a good team. That's valuable.
Ty, I could have told you that before the season. If there's one team that will not.
Oh no, I knew.
It'll be the New York Knicks. Look, it's not necessarily a pushback because like just. The Knicks get met with this a lot whenever they do anything. It's like, of course, the Knicks lit their number 11 pick on fire so that way they can clear cap space to get Jalen Brunson. And like, what's Jalen Brunson? You spent $100 million on a guy that's, was a bench player in Dallas. I know the more informed NBA fan was like, or NBA analyst, whatever you want to call it.
I think fanalist is good.
Yeah. Understood his value. Guy's the 16th highest paid point guard in the NBA. And my God, has he been a godsend. And that's like not to dismiss some of his defensive limitations. And, he's had a bit of a down stretch lately where he just hasn't been what he was for the first month and a half of the season. But like you said, the point guard position has just been dire. Like there's 3 weeks of Jeremy Lin.
I was gonna say, if you don't count Linsanity, who is the best Knicks point guard since?
Marbury, Charlie Ward, Derek Harper, Mark Jackson, and then you go back to Clyde, in the 70s. And like having Jalen Brunson here has been at least consistently, and like this is like to Julius Randle's All-Star case, like to know that you have a calming force in crunch time. That is Jalen Brunson. He's been so clutch and he's been the number one option. And at times when if you double Jalen Brunson, then you've got Randle with a mismatch. Yeah. Like it's all been a nice breath of fresh air. And it's a lot of the reason why they're 22-18 and would play the Bucks in the first round if the season ended today.
I might hurt your feelings. I'm okay with that given the other teams floating around down there. I still don't want the Heat. I'll take the Knicks matchup.
Oh, I would just take it because the Knicks are the 6th seed. I would avoid the play-in, No,
I didn't want to sound offensive. Where I'm if the Knicks are the first round, that feels pretty good because the Bucks have had some tough ones. But no, I think it's a win for both sides, honestly. Yeah,
you have to know the ceiling for the Knicks right now, at least as far as I'm concerned as a Knicks fan, the fact that the playoffs are not, at least it's not that they're an expectation, but that they're in the conversation and a realistic thing to look forward to is it's a breath of fresh air.
I mean, I think if you finish top 6, it's like no matter what happens from there, it's kind of a win. Like above crazy. Play-in is a big. That's a you're a good team if you're above the play-in on either conference. So.
I got them at plus 170 before the season to make the play-in. And predicted that they'd be the 9th seed, like that they'd be hosting the play-in against whoever finished 10th. And
do you win? So is it auto win then if they're not? If you lose, does Vegas get you if they're 6?
No, so they have to finish at. Okay. That'd be funny if they did, but if they, we'll talk to my friends at FanDuel if they decide to pull something like that. But as far as I know, if they
at least
make the playoffs, that's already in. Ty, thank you so much for giving me the time today. Where can people find you and the things that you do on the internet?
Yeah, so at Ti Windisch on Twitter, TiWindisch. You can find the Gyro Step and all of our other podcasts and pretty much everything we do at gspn.info. That's like our main hub for all of our content. So if you want to check out any of that, feel free to go do so. I always appreciate it.
If you are into following, obviously the Bucks or out of market teams, check out their stuff. If you're a football fan, and we're recording this around noon on Sunday, and you want to hear the reaction to the Packers' big Sunday night football game against the Detroit Lions, they've got a Packers podcast called Talk of the Tundra on their network, so you can check that out as well. Ty, it's always great talking to you.
Wait, real quick.
We have one more. What's up?
if you're a baseball fan and you want to react to a powerhouse MLB team, big money signing of Wade Miley. It's our only free agent deal so far. Cruising for a bruising as well, covers the Milwaukee Brewers. Clearly going to be a big time player now that we shelled out the big bucks for Wade Miley. So I think everyone needs to follow the Brewers now that they made that statement. I think the Mets, fine. The Yankees, sure. Aaron Judge, I guess he's good. They're no Wade Miley, so
Cruising for a Bruise is a great name. And I would love for all of my baseball focus to just be on like a tertiary signing like Miley and not what is happening with Carlos Correa. Holy cow.
Future Brewer, baby. Still in play.
Listen, it's in play. His market might diminish to who's willing to give me more than 1 year. At this point, I'll take whatever the Mets can give me at this point. Ty, thank you as always, man. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew.